David Martinez sits at his kitchen counter staring at a dozen red roses wilting in a crystal vase. 48 hours ago, he'd driven across town to the florist his wife loved, spent $60 he couldn't really afford, and arranged them perfectly before she got home from her marketing job. When Elena walked through the door that Tuesday evening, she glanced at the roses for exactly 3 seconds, rolled her eyes, and said the words that would echo in his head for months. "Romance is dead, David. This stuff doesn't work anymore." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. She grabbed a leftover slice of pizza from the fridge, scrolled through her phone, and disappeared upstairs without another word. The roses sat there like a monument to everything wrong between them. David had spent 15 years trying to keep the spark alive in their marriage, and his wife had just declared it officially extinct. What Elena didn't know was that she had just signed her own divorce papers. David Martinez had always been a romantic. Not the kind who quoted poetry or serenaded women under balconies, but the steady, reliable kind who remembered anniversaries, brought flowers on random Tuesdays, and still opened car doors after 15 years of marriage. He worked as an electrical foreman in Phoenix, Arizona, managing crews on commercial construction sites, coming home dirty and tired, but never too tired to ask Elena about her day. Their house in Tempe was modest but comfortable, a 3-bedroom ranch with a small pool in the backyard where they used to sit on summer evenings talking about their future. Elena worked downtown at a marketing firm, climbing her way up from assistant to account manager, always dressed sharp in her business attire. She was ambitious, smart, and beautiful, with dark hair she wore pulled back and eyes that used to light up when David surprised her with small gestures. But somewhere along the way, those eyes had gone cold. The wilting roses weren't David's first attempt at rekindling what they'd lost. Over the past year, he'd tried everything. Surprise weekend trips to Sedona that Elena spent working on her laptop. Reservations at expensive restaurants where she texted through dinner. Love notes tucked in her briefcase that came back unopened in her purse. Each gesture was met with increasing indifference, sometimes outright annoyance. "You're trying too hard," she'd say when he suggested date nights. "We're not teenagers, David. We don't need all this drama." But David remembered when they were teenagers, sort of. They'd met in college, both 21, both broke, both dreaming of building something together. Elena had loved his romantic gestures then. She'd kept every movie ticket stub, pressed flowers between book pages, and called him her hopeless romantic with a smile that made his chest tight. Now, that same phrase felt like an insult. The morning after the rose incident, David woke at 5:30 as usual, made coffee, and found Elena already dressed for work, standing at the kitchen counter with her phone and a protein bar. She was scrolling through Instagram, double-tapping photos of couples on vacation, engagement announcements, anniversary celebrations. The irony wasn't lost on him. "Morning," he said, pouring himself coffee from the pot he'd made for both of them. She responded without looking up. David had learned not to expect much conversation before 8 a.m., but this felt different, colder. He tried anyway. "What's your day look like? Maybe we could grab lunch downtown, that Thai place you like." Elena finally looked up, but only to glance at the clock on the microwave. "Can't, client meeting." "And David?" She paused at the door, her tone sharp enough to cut. "Stop planning things without asking me. I have a career too." She left, and David stood there holding his coffee, wondering when suggesting lunch had become a crime. The roses on the counter seemed to mock him, their petals scattered on the granite like tiny red accusations. That evening, David decided to try a different approach. Instead of flowers or dinner plans, he'd focus on simple connection. When Elena came home at 7:30, later than usual, he was on the couch reading a book about electrical codes. No romantic gestures in sight. "How was the client meeting?" he asked when she walked in, keeping his tone casual. "Fine," she said, not stopping as she headed for the stairs. "I'm exhausted, going to bed early." It was 8 o'clock. David watched her disappear upstairs, heard the bedroom door close, and realized he was living with a stranger. The woman he'd married, the one who used to curl up next to him on this same couch and talk about everything and nothing, had been replaced by someone who treated him like an inconvenient roommate. But David wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. Over the next few weeks, he tried Elena's preferred approach. Low-key, practical, no drama. He stopped bringing flowers, stopped suggesting date nights, stopped leaving notes. Instead, he focused on being a good husband in quieter ways. He fixed the leaky faucet in the guest bathroom she'd mentioned months ago, organized the garage, took care of the pool maintenance she always complained about. Elena didn't notice any of it. When she came home to find the garage transformed from chaos to organization, she walked right past it to grab a bottle of wine from the kitchen. When the guest bathroom faucet stopped dripping for the first time in 6 months, she never mentioned it. David realized he could renovate their entire house, and Elena wouldn't acknowledge it unless it somehow benefited her work schedule. The breaking point came on a Saturday morning in late September. David had woken up early, made pancakes from scratch, and set the table with their good dishes, the ones they'd gotten as wedding gifts and barely used. Fresh coffee in the pot, orange juice in actual glasses instead of plastic cups, even a small vase with wildflowers he'd picked from their backyard. It wasn't grand or expensive, just a nice breakfast for his wife on a weekend morning. Elena came downstairs in her robe, hair messy, looking like the college girl he'd fallen in love with. For a moment, David felt hopeful. Maybe this would work. Maybe simple was better. She looked at the table, looked at the pancakes, looked at David standing there with a spatula and a tentative smile, and shook her head. Romance is dead, David. This stuff doesn't work anymore. She grabbed a protein bar from the pantry, poured coffee into a travel mug, and headed back upstairs. "I'm going for a run, then I have work to catch up on. Don't wait up." David stood in the kitchen surrounded by the ruins of his breakfast effort. The pancakes were getting cold. The wildflowers seemed pathetic now, weeds in a cheap vase. The good dishes felt like props in a play no one wanted to watch. That's when David realized something Elena hadn't figured out yet. If romance was dead, he was going to bury the whole marriage with it. He scraped the pancakes into the trash, put the dishes in the dishwasher, and threw the wildflowers away. Then he sat down at the kitchen table and started making a list. Not a romantic list, not a how to save my marriage list. A practical, systematic list of exactly how to end one. Elena wanted romance dead? Fine. But she was about to learn that some things, once dead, take everything else with them. The first item on David's list was simple. Stop trying. No more gestures, romantic or otherwise. No more asking about her day, no more suggesting activities together, no more pancakes on Saturday mornings. If Elena wanted a roommate instead of a husband, that's exactly what she'd get. The second item was more complex. Start documenting. Elena's late nights, her dismissive behavior, her complete lack of interest in their relationship. Not for some dramatic confrontation, but for the lawyers he was already planning to call. The third item was the most important. Prepare for independence. Separate finances, separate social circles, separate lives. Elena had made it clear she wanted to live like she was single. David was going to help her make that official. He folded the list, put it in his wallet, and went to the garage to work on his motorcycle, a 1985 Harley he'd been restoring as a hobby. Elena had always complained about the noise, the mess, the time he spent on that old piece of junk. Today, for the first time in months, David didn't care what Elena thought. The Harley's engine turned over on the third try, rumbling to life with a sound that made David's chest feel less tight. He revved it once, twice, letting the noise fill the garage and probably annoy the neighbors. Through the kitchen window, he could see Elena on her laptop at the table, wearing noise-canceling headphones, completely ignoring him. Perfect. The marriage was already over. Elena just didn't know it yet. That evening, when Elena asked why he hadn't made dinner, David looked up from his book and shrugged. "Figured you'd handle it. You're the independent one." She stared at him for a moment, confusion flickering across her face, then ordered Chinese takeout. They ate in silence, Elena scrolling through her phone, David reading about motorcycle engines. It was like a preview of their divorce, except they were still wearing wedding rings. After dinner, David went back to the garage. Elena went upstairs. They didn't say goodnight. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The next morning, David woke up with a clarity he hadn't felt in years. Elena wanted romance dead? He'd killed it. But in doing so, he'd also killed his willingness to tolerate being treated like garbage in his own home. Phase 1 of his plan was already working. Elena had barely noticed his complete withdrawal of effort, which told David everything he needed to know about how little his marriage actually meant to his wife. Now it was time for Phase 2, systematic disengagement. David had always been methodical, whether he was wiring a commercial building or planning a weekend project. The same skills that made him good at his job would serve him well in dismantling his marriage. Elena wanted to live like a single woman. David was about to show her exactly what that looked like. He started small. When Elena mentioned they were running low on her favorite coffee, David didn't pick it up during his grocery run. When she complained about it the next morning, he looked up from his breakfast and said, "Add it to your list. I'm only buying what I need now." "What's that supposed to mean?" Elena asked, holding an empty coffee container like evidence of David's failure. "Means you handle your stuff, I'll handle mine. Isn't that what you wanted? Independence?" Elena stared at him, clearly confused by this new dynamic, but she didn't push it. She grabbed her purse and left for work without another word. David poured himself another cup of his generic grocery store coffee and smiled for the first time in weeks. The division of responsibilities became David's new religion. Elena's dry cleaning? Her problem. The bills for her credit cards? She could handle those herself. Dinner plans? David made food for one and left Elena to figure out her own meals. When she asked why there weren't leftovers anymore, David explained it simply. "I'm not cooking for someone who thinks everything I do is worthless." Elena's confusion was turning into irritation, but David noticed she still wasn't fighting for their relationship. She was fighting for the convenience of having a husband who took care of everything while she lived like a single woman. That told David his plan was working perfectly. The real test came when Elena's car broke down on a Thursday afternoon. Normally, David would have dropped everything, left work early, and spent his evening dealing with mechanics and tow trucks and Elena's stress about being without transportation. This time, when she called him panicking about being stuck at her office, David listened patiently and then said, "That sucks. Call AAA." "David, I need you to handle this. I have a presentation tomorrow morning." "I'm at work too, Elena. You're a smart, capable, independent woman. Figure it out." The silence on the other end of the phone stretched so long David thought she'd hung up. Finally, Elena's voice came back, tight and angry. "What is wrong with you lately?" "Nothing's wrong," David said, genuinely meaning it. "I'm just giving you what you want. Independence. Romance is dead, remember? Well, so is me dropping everything to solve your problems." Elena hung up without saying goodbye. David went back to running electrical conduit in a new office building and didn't think about her again until he got home that evening to find her car in the driveway, apparently fixed. She never told him how she'd handled it, and he never asked. That night, Elena tried to start a fight about his attitude problem, but David refused to engage. He listened to her complaints about his lack of support, his sudden selfishness, his complete personality change, and when she was done, he nodded and said, "You're right. I've changed. You killed the part of me that cared about making you happy. This is what's left." Elena's mouth fell open. She'd clearly expected him to apologize, to promise to be better, to beg for her forgiveness like he had so many times before. Instead, David picked up his book about Harley restoration and went back to reading. "We need to talk about this," Elena said, still standing in the middle of their living room like she was giving a presentation. "We just did," David replied without looking up. "You said romance is dead. I agreed. Now we're living like roommates instead of married people. Isn't this what you wanted?" Elena didn't have an answer for that, because they both knew it was exactly what she'd wanted. She just hadn't expected David to give it to her so completely. Over the next few days, David watched Elena struggle with the new dynamic. She'd gotten comfortable with having a husband who anticipated her needs, solved her problems, and absorbed her bad moods while asking for nothing in return. Now she had a polite stranger who split the electric bill and said good morning before leaving for work. The funny thing was, David felt better than he had in years. The constant tension of trying to please someone who couldn't be pleased was gone. The exhaustion of putting effort into a relationship where he was the only one trying had lifted. Elena had set him free by telling him to stop trying, and he'd taken that freedom and run with it. But David wasn't naive. He knew Elena wouldn't tolerate this new arrangement indefinitely. She'd either fight for their marriage or she'd escalate toward divorce. Either way, David was prepared. His separate bank account was growing. His documentation of her behavior was comprehensive. His emotional investment in their relationship was officially dead. Elena had wanted to kill romance. Instead, she'd killed David's willingness to be married to someone who treated him like an inconvenience. Phase 2 of his plan was complete. Now it was time for Phase 3, showing Elena exactly what she'd lost and making sure she could never get it back. The marriage was over. Elena just didn't know it yet. But David had learned patience from 15 years of trying to please an unpleasable woman. He could wait a little longer for her to figure out what she'd done to herself. After all, good things come to those who wait. And divorce, David was beginning to realize, was going to be a very good thing. David's transformation didn't happen overnight, but Elena was too absorbed in her own world to notice the gradual shift. 3 weeks after the pancake incident, she was still coming home to a house that ran smoothly, bills that got paid, and a husband who was polite but distant. What she didn't realize was that David had started treating their marriage like a business arrangement, and he was methodically preparing to dissolve the partnership. The first major test came when Elena's sister Jessica called to invite them to her engagement party in Scottsdale. Jessica was 28, a pediatric nurse who'd found love with a firefighter named Marcus. Their relationship was everything David and Elena's used to be, full of laughter, small gestures, and genuine affection. Elena had always been jealous of Jessica's happiness, though she'd never admit it. "We have to go," Elena announced, hanging up the phone. "It's next Saturday at 7. Cocktail attire." David looked up from his laptop where he'd been researching divorce attorneys. "Have fun." Elena frowned, clearly expecting a different response. "What do you mean, have fun? We're both going." "I'm not going anywhere," David said, returning to his screen. "You can represent both of us." "David, it's my sister's engagement party. You have to come." "I don't have to do anything except pay my half of the mortgage," David replied calmly. "You want to celebrate love and romance? Go ahead. Just don't expect me to pretend I believe in it anymore." Elena's face went through several expressions: confusion, anger, then something that might have been panic. "People will ask where you are." "Tell them I'm dead," David suggested. "Romantically speaking, I am." The fight that followed was Elena's most passionate response to anything David had done in months. She accused him of embarrassing her, of being petty, of having some kind of mental breakdown. David listened patiently, then pointed out that she'd spent the last year making it clear his presence at social events was more obligation than pleasure. "You scroll through your phone at every dinner, every party, every family gathering," David said. "You act like spending time with me is a chore, so I'm removing the chore from your schedule." Elena went to the party alone and came back furious. Apparently, everyone had asked about David, and Elena had struggled to explain his absence without admitting their marriage was falling apart. Jessica had been particularly concerned, remembering how devoted David had always seemed. "Your sister asked if we were having problems," Elena told David the next morning. "I had to lie to my own family because of your tantrum." "Did you tell her romance is dead?" David asked, buttering his toast. "Because that's not a lie." That's just the truth. Elena slammed her coffee mug down hard enough to splash liquid across the counter. "You're being ridiculous. One comment about romance doesn't mean you get to check out of our entire marriage." "One comment?" David laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Elena, you've been checking out for over a year. I just finally got the message." What Elena didn't know was that David had spent her sister's party doing reconnaissance of his own. He'd driven to downtown Phoenix and met with Robert Chen, a divorce attorney recommended by his coworker Mike. Robert was mid-40s, sharp-dressed, and had a reputation for being thorough but fair. More importantly, he specialized in cases where one spouse had mentally checked out of the marriage long before filing papers. "Your situation is more common than you'd think," Robert had told David in his glass-walled office overlooking Central Avenue. One partner becomes emotionally unavailable, the other partner tries to compensate, and eventually, the trying partner burns out. The question is whether you want to try counseling first or move straight to dissolution. David had been clear about his answer. She told me romance is dead. I'm not interested in resurrecting something she killed. Robert had nodded, making notes. Arizona is a no-fault state, which simplifies things. We'll need to establish separate residences, document the breakdown of the relationship, and prepare for asset division. How are your finances structured? That conversation had been more productive than any talk David had with Elena in months. Robert was practical, straightforward, and didn't try to convince David that his marriage could be saved. He treated divorce like what it was, a legal solution to an emotional problem that couldn't be fixed. Elena's behavior after the engagement party confirmed David's decision. Instead of trying to repair the damage she'd caused, she doubled down on her independence. She started staying out later, claiming work obligations that seemed to multiply every week. When David stopped asking where she'd been, Elena seemed almost disappointed, like she'd been looking forward to more confrontations. The breaking point in Phase 2 came during the first week of October. Elena had been promoted to senior account manager at her firm, an advancement she'd been working toward for 3 years. The old David would have planned a celebration dinner, bought champagne, maybe even surprised her with a weekend getaway to mark the achievement. The new David congratulated her politely and went back to his book. "That's it?" Elena asked, standing in their living room holding the promotion letter like evidence of David's inadequacy. "I get the biggest professional break of my career and you say, 'Good job,' like I passed a quiz?" David looked up from his motorcycle manual. "What did you expect?" "I expected my husband to be excited for me, to want to celebrate, to act like this matters." "It does matter," David said. "To you, and that should be enough." Elena's face flushed red. "You used to care about my successes?" "I used to care about a lot of things," David replied. "Then you made it clear that my caring was annoying, outdated, and unwanted. So I stopped." "I never said that." David set down his book and looked at Elena directly. "You said romance is dead. You said my gestures don't work anymore. You roll your eyes when I try to plan things together. You treat every attempt I make to connect with you like it's an inconvenience. So tell me, Elena, what exactly did you think was going to happen?" Elena opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. For the first time in months, she seemed to realize that her words had consequences beyond the moment she spoke them. "I didn't mean you should stop caring about everything," she said finally. "Too late," David replied, picking up his book. "You can't kill part of a marriage and expect the rest to survive." That night, Elena tried a different approach. She made dinner for both of them, opened a bottle of wine, and attempted to create the kind of intimate evening she'd been rejecting for months. David ate the food, drank the wine, and complimented her cooking. But when Elena tried to steer the conversation toward their relationship, toward reconciliation, David remained politely distant. "I miss us," Elena said over dessert, a store-bought cheesecake she'd presented like it was homemade. "There is no us," David replied. "There's you, and there's me, and we happen to share a mortgage." "That's not true, isn't it? When's the last time we had a conversation that wasn't about logistics? When's the last time you asked me about my day and actually listened to the answer? When's the last time you initiated any kind of physical affection that wasn't perfunctory?" Elena couldn't answer any of those questions, and they both knew it. The next morning, David took his first concrete step toward ending the marriage. He opened a separate checking account at a different bank, one where Elena had no access or visibility. He also rented a small storage unit across town and began quietly moving his personal belongings. Photo albums from his childhood, his tools, books that mattered to him, anything with sentimental value that he didn't want to lose in a contentious divorce. Elena noticed his father's old toolbox had disappeared from the garage, but when she asked about it, David simply said he'd loaned it to a coworker. She didn't press the issue, probably because she'd never cared about his father's tools in the first place. David's coworker Mike had been through a brutal divorce 3 years earlier and had become David's unofficial advisor on the process. Mike was 42, a master electrician who'd lost half his assets and most of his retirement to an ex-wife who cheated on him for 2 years before he found out. The key is preparation, Mike told David during a lunch break at their current job site, a new medical complex in Chandler. Don't let emotions drive your decisions. Document everything. Protect your assets. And whatever you do, don't move out of the house until your lawyer tells you to. David appreciated Mike's practical approach. There was no judgment, no attempts to talk him out of divorce, just solid advice from someone who'd survived the process. "How did you know it was really over?" David asked, unwrapping a sandwich Elena hadn't made. Mike thought for a moment. "When I realized I was happier at work than at home. When coming back from a business trip felt like punishment instead of homecoming. When I started fantasizing about what my life would look like without her in it." David nodded. He'd been having those same thoughts for weeks. Elena's response to David's emotional withdrawal was predictable. She tried to regain control through manipulation. She started mentioning how worried her family was about David's behavior. She brought up their wedding photos, their shared memories, their plans for the future. She even suggested couples counseling, something she'd rejected when David had proposed it a year earlier. "It's not too late to fix this," Elena said one evening, sitting on the couch where David was reading. She'd positioned herself close enough to touch him, a calculated move that would have worked on the old David. "Fix what?" David asked without looking up from his book about motorcycle restoration. "Our marriage, our problems, whatever's wrong between us." David closed the book and gave Elena his full attention. "Elena, do you remember what you said about romance being dead? I was having a bad day. I didn't mean it literally." "Yes, you did. And you were right. Romance is dead. But so is my willingness to be married to someone who treats me like an inconvenience." Elena's eyes filled with tears, the first genuine emotion David had seen from her in months. But he didn't feel the usual compulsion to comfort her, to fix whatever was making her sad. That instinct had died along with his romantic feelings. "I love you," Elena said, reaching for his hand. David didn't pull away, but he didn't squeeze back either. "Love isn't enough, Elena. Respect matters. Partnership matters. Actually wanting to spend time with your spouse matters. You don't want any of those things with me." "That's not true." "Then prove it," David said, standing up. "Show me one thing you've done in the last 6 months that demonstrates you actually enjoy being married to me." Elena couldn't answer, and her silence was more honest than anything she'd said in weeks. The conversation marked the end of Phase 2. Elena now understood that David's withdrawal wasn't a temporary mood or a plea for attention. It was a fundamental shift in their relationship dynamic, and there was no going back to the way things were. David's preparation continued methodically. He met with Robert Chen again to discuss timeline and strategy. He opened a credit card in his name only. He researched apartments in his price range, though he didn't plan to move until the legal process was underway. Most importantly, he started rebuilding his social connections outside of Elena's circle. He'd let many friendships lapse over the years, partly because Elena had never seemed interested in maintaining couple friendships, and partly because he'd been so focused on trying to fix his marriage. Mike introduced David to a group of guys who met every Thursday for poker at a sports bar in Tempe. The group included divorced men, married men, and single men, but they all shared a common understanding that friendship didn't require drama or emotional labor. They played cards, watched games, and talked about work, sports, and motorcycles. It was exactly what David needed. "You seem different," said Carlos, a divorced contractor who'd become David's favorite poker opponent. "More relaxed." "I stopped trying to save something that doesn't want to be saved," David replied, folding a weak hand. "Marriage?" Carlos asked. "Among other things." Carlos nodded knowingly. "My ex-wife used to complain that I didn't put enough effort into our relationship, so I tried harder. Know what happened? She complained that I was trying too hard. Can't win a game when the other player keeps changing the rules." That analogy stuck with David. Elena had been changing the rules of their marriage for months, and he'd been exhausting himself trying to keep up. Now he was done playing her game entirely. Elena seemed to sense that David was pulling away, not just emotionally, but practically. She started paying more attention to his schedule, asking more questions about his evenings out, showing interest in his life for the first time in months. But it felt calculated rather than genuine, like she was gathering intelligence rather than reconnecting with her husband. "Where are you going tonight?" Elena asked on a Thursday when David was getting ready for poker. "Out with some guys from work," David replied, checking his wallet. "What guys? I don't know them." David paused at the door. "You don't know them because you've never shown any interest in my life outside of this house. That's changing now." Elena's face showed alarm for the first time since David had started his withdrawal. She was beginning to understand that David wasn't just withholding romance, he was building a life that didn't include her. "I want to meet your friends," Elena said suddenly. "Why?" David asked. "So you can be polite for one evening, then complain about them later? So you can scroll through your phone while they try to make conversation? Thanks, but no." The poker games became David's sanctuary. For 4 hours every Thursday, he could be himself without having to manage Elena's moods or anticipate her criticism. The guys didn't expect him to be anything other than a decent card player and reliable friend. It was a reminder of what relationships could be like when both people actually wanted to be there. Elena's desperation began showing in small ways. She started cooking dinner more often, though she'd make a point of mentioning how much effort it required. She bought David a new motorcycle magazine, though she'd previously complained about the clutter of his subscriptions. She even suggested they take a weekend trip to Flagstaff, something she'd rejected multiple times when David had proposed it. But David could see through the performance. Elena wasn't trying to rebuild their relationship. She was trying to regain control of it. She wanted the security of marriage without the effort of being a good wife. She wanted the convenience of a devoted husband without having to offer devotion in return. "I think we should renew our wedding vows," Elena announced one evening over dinner, a meal she'd prepared with obvious effort. David almost choked on his food. "Are you serious?" "I think it would be good for us, a fresh start, a way to recommit to each other." David set down his fork and stared at Elena. "You want to recommit to a marriage you've spent the last year trying to escape?" "I haven't been trying to escape anything." "Elena, you've made it clear that everything about being married to me is either boring, annoying, or outdated. Now you want to renew vows you've already broken?" Elena's face flushed. "I never broke any vows." "You broke the one about honoring your spouse," David replied. "You've treated me with contempt for months. You've dismissed every attempt I've made to connect with you. You've acted like my love was a burden instead of a gift." Elena's eyes filled with tears again, but David noticed they came and went conveniently, usually when she wanted something from him. "I can change," Elena said. "We can fix this." David stood up from the table, his dinner half finished. "You can't fix something you broke on purpose, Elena, and I'm done being broken." That night, David called Robert Chen to schedule another meeting. Phase 2 was complete. Elena now understood that their marriage was in serious trouble, but she was responding with manipulation rather than genuine change. It was time for Phase 3, making the divorce inevitable. David had learned a crucial lesson over the past few months. He'd spent years trying to be the husband Elena wanted, adjusting his behavior to accommodate her changing demands. But Elena didn't want a husband. She wanted a convenient roommate who would handle the practical aspects of adult life without staying out of her emotional space. David was done. He was done adjusting. He was done pretending that Elena's crumbs of affection were enough to sustain a marriage. Elena had declared romance dead, and David had agreed. But in killing romance, she'd also killed David's willingness to be treated like garbage in his own home. The marriage was over. Now it was just a matter of making it official. The only question remaining was whether Elena would go quietly or whether she'd fight to preserve a relationship she'd already destroyed. Either way, David was prepared. He'd been the romantic for 15 years. Now it was time to be practical. And practically speaking, divorce was looking better every day. The final phase of David's plan began on a cold November morning when Elena made her biggest mistake yet. She'd been growing increasingly desperate as David's emotional and practical withdrawal continued, trying everything from surprise affection to manufactured crises to regain his attention. But desperation made her sloppy, and sloppy people reveal truths they'd prefer to keep hidden. David was in the garage working on his Harley when Elena's phone rang on the kitchen counter. She was upstairs showering, getting ready for another allegedly important Saturday morning meeting at her marketing firm. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times before David heard Elena's voice calling down. "David, can you see who's calling? I'm expecting an important work call." David wiped his hands on a shop rag and walked into the kitchen. Elena's phone was face up on the granite counter, buzzing insistently. The caller ID read Marcus, work, but the preview of a text message underneath caught David's attention. It was from the same Marcus sent 20 minutes earlier. "Can't wait to see you this morning. Last night was incredible." David stared at the phone for a long moment, feeling something that wasn't quite surprise and wasn't quite relief. It was more like confirmation. Elena's late nights, her sudden need for privacy, her complete disinterest in their marriage, it all made sense now. She wasn't just emotionally checked out, she was physically checked out too. The phone stopped ringing, then immediately started again. Same caller. David could hear Elena singing in the shower upstairs, oblivious to the fact that her secret had just been exposed. When Elena came downstairs 15 minutes later, hair wet and rushing to grab her purse, David was sitting at the kitchen table with her phone in front of her. "Who called?" Elena asked, reaching for the device. David slid it across the table toward her. "Marcus from work. Seemed eager to reach you." Elena's face went through several expressions as she picked up the phone and saw the missed calls. David watched her realize that the text message was visible, watched her understand that David had seen it, watched her calculate her next move. "It's not what it looks like," Elena said finally, the words sounding rehearsed. "What does it look like?" David asked calmly. Elena's mouth opened and closed several times. She'd clearly prepared for the possibility of being caught, but not for David's complete lack of emotional reaction. "Marcus is a colleague. We're working on a big campaign together." The text was about a presentation. David nodded thoughtfully. "What presentation involves not being able to wait to see someone after an incredible night?" Elena's face flushed red. "You're reading too much into it. We had dinner last night to discuss strategy. It went well, that's all." "Elena," David said, his voice still eerily calm, "I've been married to you for 15 years. I know what you look like when you're lying." The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Elena clutched her phone against her chest as if protecting it could somehow undo what David had already seen. "Are you sleeping with him?" David asked directly. Elena's jaw tightened. "I don't have to answer that." "Actually, you do. We're still married, legally speaking. So I'll ask again. Are you sleeping with Marcus from work?" Elena set her phone down and crossed her arms defensively. "My relationship with Marcus is complicated." David almost laughed. "Complicated? That's one way to put it." "You don't understand the situation," Elena continued, her voice taking on the tone she used when explaining marketing concepts to clients. "Marcus and I have a connection, an intellectual connection, something we haven't had in years." "An intellectual connection," David repeated. "Is that what we're calling adultery now?" Elena's composure cracked. "Don't you dare judge me. You checked out of this marriage months ago. You stopped trying. You stopped caring. What did you expect me to do?" David stood up slowly, feeling a strange sense of peace wash over him. This moment had been inevitable since the day Elena declared romance dead. Now it was finally here, and David felt nothing but relief. "I expected you to have a conversation with me before you started screwing your coworker," David said. "I expected you to ask for a divorce before you decided to blow up our marriage. But mostly, Elena, I expected you to have enough respect for me to end things honestly, instead of making me live with a cheating wife who treats me like garbage." Elena's eyes filled with tears, but this time David could see the calculation behind them. "It's not like that. Marcus understands me in ways you never have. He appreciates my ambition. He doesn't try to hold me back with romantic gestures and emotional demands." "How long?" David asked. "What?" "How long have you been cheating on me?" Elena hesitated, then seemed to decide that honesty might serve her better than continued lies. 3 months, since the office retreat in August. David did the math quickly. 3 months ago was right around the time Elena had told him romance was dead. She hadn't been referring to their marriage, she'd been clearing the way for her affair. "So when you told me romance was dead, you were already sleeping with someone else?" "It wasn't planned," Elena said quickly. "It just happened. Marcus and I were working late on a project, and there was this moment of connection. One thing led to another." "For 3 months," David said flatly. "David, I never meant for this to happen, but you have to understand, our marriage has been dead for a long time. We've been living like strangers. At least with Marcus, I feel alive again." David walked to the window and looked out at their backyard, at the pool where they used to sit together on summer evenings, at the garden Elena had asked him to plant 3 years ago, and then never helped maintain. Everything looked different now, like he was seeing it through new eyes. "You're right about one thing," David said without turning around. "Our marriage has been dead, but you killed it, Elena. You killed it by treating every effort I made like an annoyance. You killed it by acting like my love was a burden. You killed it by deciding that being a good wife was beneath you." "That's not fair," Elena protested. "I never said any of those things." David turned back to face her. "You didn't have to say them. You showed me every day for the past year. And now I understand why. You weren't just checking out of our marriage. You were already checked in to someone else's." Elena's phone buzzed with another text. She glanced at it automatically, then seemed to realize how that looked and set it face down on the counter. "What do you want me to say?" Elena asked, her voice taking on a defensive edge. "That I'm sorry? That I'll end things with Marcus? That we can go to counseling and fix everything?" "I want you to pack your bags and get out of my house," David said simply. Elena's face went white. "What?" "You heard me. Pack your things and leave. Today." "David, you can't just kick me out. I live here too. This is my home." "Your home is wherever Marcus lives. Go there." Elena's shock was giving way to anger. "I have rights. I'm your wife. You can't just throw me out because you're upset." David walked to the kitchen drawer where they kept important papers and pulled out a business card. "Robert Chen, attorney at law." He set it on the counter next to Elena's phone. "I called Robert yesterday," David lied smoothly. "Told him I suspected you were having an affair. He's expecting your call." Elena stared at the business card like it was a snake. "You hired a divorce lawyer?" "Months ago, right around the time you told me romance was dead. Funny timing, don't you think?" Elena's composure completely shattered. "You've been planning this? This whole time you've been planning to divorce me?" "I've been planning to survive you," David corrected. "There's a difference." "David, please, we can work this out. I'll end things with Marcus. We can start over. We can go to counseling." David shook his head. "Elena, do you remember what you said when I made you pancakes that Saturday morning? You said romance was dead. You said my gestures didn't work anymore. You were already sleeping with Marcus when you said that, weren't you?" Elena's silence was answer enough. "You looked me in the eye and told me romance was dead while you were having an affair with your coworker? You threw away 15 years of marriage for 3 months? And now you want me to forgive you and pretend it never happened?" "People make mistakes," Elena said desperately. "Marriages survive infidelity all the time."
"This wasn't a mistake," David replied. "This was a choice, a series of choices. You chose to have an affair. You chose to lie to me. You chose to treat me like garbage while you were screwing someone else. And now you're choosing to ask me to pretend none of it matters. Elena tried a different approach. What about our history? 15 years of marriage. All the good times we had. Doesn't that mean anything to you? David thought about their early years, when Elena had seemed to genuinely enjoy his company, when she'd appreciated his romantic gestures, when they'd talked about building a life together. It felt like remembering someone else's marriage. It means I wasted 15 years on someone who was never worthy of the effort, David said, but I'm not wasting any more. Elena's phone buzzed again. This time she ignored it completely, but they both knew who was calling. He's expecting you, David observed. Better not keep him waiting. David, please. I know I screwed up. I know I hurt you. But we can fix this. We can rebuild. No, we can't. And you know why? Because you don't actually want to fix anything. You want to manage the situation. You want to keep Marcus and keep me as a backup plan. You want to have your affair and your marriage too. Elena's face showed that David had hit the mark. She had been hoping for exactly that. A way to continue her relationship with Marcus while maintaining the security and convenience of marriage to David. That's not true, Elena said weakly. Isn't it? You're not sorry you had an affair, Elena. You're sorry you got caught. If I hadn't seen that text, you'd still be lying to me. You'd still be sneaking around with Marcus while expecting me to play the role of devoted husband. Elena couldn't deny it because they both knew it was true. I want you out of this house by tonight, David continued. Take whatever you can fit in your car. We'll figure out the rest through lawyers. Where am I supposed to go? Marcus's place? A hotel? Your sister's house? I don't care, but you're not sleeping under my roof anymore. Elena's phone rang again. This time, David could see the name on the screen. Marcus. Elena stared at it for a moment, then declined the call. He's going to keep calling, David pointed out. Your boyfriend doesn't like being ignored. He's not my boyfriend, Elena snapped. What is he then? Your intellectual connection? Your colleague with benefits? Your midlife crisis? Elena's face crumpled. For the first time since David had known her, she looked genuinely lost. I don't know what he is. I don't know what any of this is. I know what he is, David said. He's the reason our marriage is over. And you're the person who chose him over 15 years of commitment. Elena tried one more approach, the one David had been expecting since he'd found out about the affair. David, I made a terrible mistake. But if you can forgive me, if we can work through this, I promise I'll be the wife you deserve. I'll be the woman you fell in love with. David looked at Elena for a long moment, really looked at her. She was still beautiful, still intelligent, still the woman he'd married in a small ceremony 15 years ago. But somewhere along the way, she'd become someone else. Someone who could lie to her husband's face while carrying on an affair. Someone who could treat devotion like an inconvenience. Someone who could declare romance dead while giving her passion to another man. The woman I fell in love with wouldn't have done this, David said finally. She wouldn't have treated her husband like garbage while screwing her coworker. She wouldn't have looked me in the eye and lied for 3 months. The woman I fell in love with doesn't exist anymore. Maybe she never did. Elena's phone buzzed with a text. This time she looked at it, and David saw her face change. He wants to know if you know, Elena said quietly. Tell him yes, David replied. Tell him he can have you full-time now. Elena typed a response, her hands shaking. David, I know you're angry. I know you're hurt. But please don't make any permanent decisions right now. Give yourself time to process this. I've had 3 months to process it. Every time you came home late with some excuse about work, every time you were secretive with your phone, every time you treated me like I was annoying you by existing, I've been processing the end of our marriage while you were busy ending it. Elena's phone rang again. Marcus was persistent. David had to give him that. "Answer it," David said. "Tell him you're moving in today." Elena stared at the ringing phone, then at David. "I can't just move in with Marcus. We've only been... It's complicated." "It's about to get a lot less complicated," David replied. "You're about to be a single woman with limited options." Elena finally answered the phone. David could hear Marcus's voice on the other end, concerned and impatient. Elena walked into the living room for privacy, but David could still hear fragments of the conversation. Marcus was clearly unhappy about the situation being exposed. He'd probably been hoping to keep their affair secret indefinitely, enjoying Elena's attention without the responsibility of a full relationship. When Elena came back to the kitchen, she looked defeated. "Marcus thinks we should take a break, let things cool down." I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Let me guess. He was all about having an affair with a married woman, but he's not so interested in a relationship with a divorced one. Elena's silence confirmed David's suspicion. "So, now you've lost your husband and your boyfriend in the same day. That's gotta be some kind of record." "Don't be cruel," Elena said, tears flowing freely now. "Cruel?" David laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Elena, you cheated on me for 3 months. You lied to my face every single day. You treated me like garbage while you were giving your best self to another man. And you think I'm being cruel for pointing out that your affair partner doesn't want to deal with the consequences of his actions?" Elena sank into a kitchen chair, her head in her hands. "What am I supposed to do now?" "You're supposed to pack your bags and leave my house. Then you're supposed to find a lawyer and figure out how you want to handle the divorce. But mostly, you're supposed to live with the consequences of your choices." Elena looked up at David with an expression he'd never seen before. Genuine remorse mixed with desperate fear. "David, I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I destroyed our marriage. But please don't hate me. I never meant for things to go this far." David considered his response carefully. He'd loved Elena for 15 years, devoted himself to making her happy, sacrificed his own needs to accommodate hers. She'd repaid that devotion with contempt, lies, and adultery. But looking at her now, broken and alone, David realized he didn't hate her. "I don't hate you, Elena," David said quietly, "but I don't love you anymore either. You killed that when you told me romance was dead while you were having an affair. You can't kill someone's love and then ask them to keep feeling it." Elena's phone buzzed with another text. She glanced at it, then set it aside. Marcus was clearly done with their conversation, probably already distancing himself from the mess Elena had created. "Robert Chen's office is open until 5 on Saturdays," David said, nodding toward the business card still sitting on the counter. "You might want to call him and arrange your own representation." Elena picked up the card and stared at it. "Is this really what you want? Divorce?" "What I wanted was a wife who respected me enough not to cheat," David replied. "What I wanted was a marriage where both people actually wanted to be married. What I wanted was honesty. You made all of those things impossible." Elena stood up slowly, her movements uncertain. "I'll pack some things." David nodded. "Take whatever you need. We'll figure out the rest later." Elena started toward the stairs, then turned back. "David, I really am sorry. I know that doesn't change anything, but I need you to know that." David looked at his wife one last time, really looked at her. She was sorry, he could see that much. But she was sorry about the consequences, not the choices. She was sorry she'd been caught, sorry she'd lost her safety net, sorry her affair partner had abandoned her. She wasn't sorry about the 3 months of lies and betrayal. She wasn't sorry about treating David like garbage while she gave her passion to someone else. "I know you're sorry," David said, "but sorry doesn't fix 15 years of taking me for granted. Sorry doesn't undo 3 months of cheating. Sorry doesn't bring back the man who used to love you enough to make pancakes on Saturday mornings." Elena's face crumpled again, but she didn't argue. She went upstairs to pack while David sat in his kitchen, alone for the first time in hours, and felt something he hadn't experienced in months: peace. By evening, Elena was gone. She'd packed 2 suitcases and promised to arrange for the rest of her things later. She'd called her sister Jessica, who'd agreed to let Elena stay in her guest room temporarily. Marcus, it seemed, had made himself unavailable for the rest of the weekend. David spent that first evening in his house alone, and it felt like awakening from a long nightmare. He made himself dinner without having to consider Elena's preferences. He watched a motorcycle restoration show without anyone scrolling through their phone and sighing dramatically. He went to bed in the center of his mattress and slept better than he had in months. The next morning, David called Robert Chen's emergency line and left a message confirming that Elena had moved out and that divorce proceedings could begin immediately. Then he called Mike and told him the whole story. "How do you feel?" Mike asked, after David had explained about the affair, the confrontation, and Elena's departure. "Relieved," David said honestly. "I've been wondering for months why Elena was treating me like the enemy. Now I know. She was trying to make me into the bad guy so she could justify her affair." "That's textbook cheater behavior," Mike replied. "My ex did the same thing. Started picking fights about everything so she could tell her boyfriend what a terrible husband I was." David thought about Elena's increasing criticism over the past few months, her dismissive attitude toward his romantic gestures, her declaration that romance was dead. It had all been preparation for her affair, a way to rewrite their marriage history to justify her betrayal. "The crazy thing is, I'm not even angry," David told Mike. "I should be furious, right? But mostly, I just feel free." "That's because you've been mourning this marriage for months," Mike replied. "The woman you loved was already gone. Finding out about the affair just confirmed what you already knew." Mike was right. David had been grieving the loss of his marriage since the day Elena told him romance was dead. The affair was just the final proof that the woman he'd married no longer existed. Over the next few weeks, David threw himself into rebuilding his life. He bought new furniture to replace the pieces Elena took. He redecorated their bedroom, turning it from a space they'd shared into a space that was entirely his. He joined a weekend motorcycle club and started taking longer rides through the Arizona desert, rediscovering the sense of freedom he'd forgotten he could feel. Elena's lawyer contacted Robert Chen 2 weeks after she'd moved out. Elena was apparently hoping for a reconciliation and was asking David to consider couples counseling before proceeding with divorce. David's response was simple: no. "She's trying to buy time," Robert explained during one of their meetings. "Some people think if they can delay the divorce long enough, their spouse will change their mind." "Not happening," David replied. "She made her choice when she started sleeping with Marcus. I'm just making it official." Elena tried calling David directly several times, but he didn't answer. She left voicemails explaining that her relationship with Marcus was over, that she'd made a terrible mistake, that she wanted to fight for their marriage. David deleted the messages without listening to them completely. The divorce proceedings moved quickly since David had no interest in prolonging the process. Arizona's no-fault divorce laws meant that Elena's adultery, while morally relevant, didn't affect the legal outcome. They divided their assets according to state guidelines, sold the house, and went their separate ways. David received one final communication from Elena 6 months after their divorce was finalized. It was a handwritten letter delivered through her lawyer, apologizing again, and explaining that she'd finally understood what she'd lost. She'd moved to Seattle for a new job, she wrote, and was in therapy trying to understand why she'd destroyed the best relationship she'd ever had. David read the letter once, then threw it away. Elena's journey of self-discovery was no longer his concern. A year after Elena moved out, David was living in a small house in Chandler with a 2-car garage perfect for motorcycle restoration. He'd been promoted to project manager at his company and was making more money than he ever had. His Thursday night poker games had evolved into genuine friendships, and he'd started dating a woman named Lisa who appreciated his romantic gestures and actually enjoyed spending time with him. "Do you ever regret getting divorced?" Lisa asked one evening as they sat by David's pool, sharing a bottle of wine and watching the sunset. David thought about the question seriously. Did he regret losing 15 years of marriage? Did he regret the time and energy he'd invested in someone who'd ultimately betrayed him? Did he regret trusting someone who'd proven unworthy of that trust? "I regret marrying the wrong person," David said finally, "but I don't regret leaving her." Lisa nodded, understanding. She'd been through her own difficult divorce and knew the difference between regret and relief. "Elena did me a favor," David continued. "She told me romance was dead, and I believed her. But she was wrong. Romance wasn't dead. It was just wasted on someone who couldn't appreciate it." David's phone buzzed with a text from Mike, asking if he wanted to ride to Flagstaff the next weekend. David texted back, "Absolutely." He looked at Lisa, who was reading a book and sipping her wine, comfortable in the silence between them. She glanced up and smiled, and David felt something he'd forgotten was possible: contentment. Elena had been right about one thing. Romance was dead. Their romance. The one-sided relationship where David gave everything and Elena took it for granted. But romance itself? Romance was alive and well, just waiting for someone who deserved it. David had buried his marriage, but he'd also buried the version of himself who thought love meant accepting disrespect. The man who emerged from that grave was stronger, wiser, and done settling for less than he deserved. Elena had declared romance dead, so David had buried it. But in doing so, he'd also buried everything else that was dead in his life: his willingness to be taken for granted, his tolerance for disrespect, and his belief that marriage meant sacrificing his happiness for someone else's convenience. The marriage was dead and buried, but David Martinez was very much alive. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.